And this is the beginning of our event today as we spend some time talking with Gabrielle Norris, Claire Harvey, Jay Johnston and Tim Costello. Of course, the first three being candidates for the Frankston Council in the upcoming local elections. Let's start by having a look at how many people we've got. So we've got about 11 people here, and we're also streaming live on Facebook. So if you're watching on Facebook, you can get involved by posting comments, posting questions in the comments box, and responding in that way. We've got a couple of polls. You can respond in that way. So don't feel like you're a second-rate participant if you're watching from Facebook. And if there are questions there that we don't catch in the process of today, the candidates will follow that up afterwards. So our purpose today is really to help you get to know these candidates and their values, to familiarise you with the values or the Australia Made campaign, which, well, not campaign, but values that they have aligned themselves with, and to share their visions, ideals and personalities with you. We are going to start off with a poll, which we might run now, asking you where you come from in the Frankston Council area, because we've got 3 wards, and our IT guru will perhaps deploy that now. Here it is. So feel free to click and we'll get an idea of the people here. If you're on Facebook, feel free to post in the comments which ward you are from, and the candidates will feel the corresponding amount of pressure depending on who has the most attendees. Now, before we kind of start, we do want to cultivate a culture of respect by prioritising the responses that we get or the questions that are given politely, just as the candidates themselves are expected to respect you as participants and to speak in a way that, that affirms your own dignity. So we're going to be really nice and friendly. And we better get into talking about these candidates. So Claire Harvey, give us a wave, Claire.
Over here.
Excellent. Is running for the South Ward of Frankston. She lives, works and raises her children in Frankston, has a Bachelor of Commerce with experience both in not-for-profit and business sectors. She's been involved in local sustainable housing development and is committed to environmental protection, resource recovery and action on climate change. Gabrielle Norris is running for election in Frankston's Northwest Ward. Raising 3 daughters in Frankston has given this events and cultural coordinator opportunity to be involved in various capacities with local kinders, primary schools and secondary schools, as well as in community programs supporting families with young children. She is passionate about community representation and positively resourcing current and future generations. Jay Johnston is a family and community man running for election in Frankston's Northeast Ward. He is a secondary school teacher with 6 children of his own who has regular speaking engagements, a program on local radio, and has volunteered in footy clubs and schools. He is passionate about seeing the people of Frankston and so the city itself prosper. And finally, and very excitingly, we have the Reverend Tim Costello with us today. Tim was in 2014 elected as one of Australia's National Living Treasures. Previously a Chief Executive Officer and Chief Advocate for World Vision Australia, he has worked as a lawyer and has served as Mayor of St Kilda. He is the author of more than a handful of books, his latest being an evocative memoir titled A Lot with a Little. Reverend Costello, we are very privileged to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so the way the event will run will be that in the first part, the panel of 4 will respond to a number of questions from myself that are aimed to dig into the values, proposals and intentions of them as candidates. And Tim will make comment as we go along. Any questions that you as the audience have can be sent via the chat box. We'll collect these up and spend the second part of the event exploring them. As I've mentioned, if you're watching on Facebook, you can post comments or post your questions in the comments box. So I wonder if we can get the response to the poll. Sorry, I'm just looking for it and I don't know what that was, but maybe our IT guru can send me the results and we will be interested to have a look at that. Here we go. I can see them now. Brilliant. So we have 25% of participants from Northeast Ward. We have 33% from Northwest Ward and 33% from South Ward. 8% don't live in Frankston. So we're pretty evenly spread. so you can just share the pressure equally among you guys. To begin with, I wonder if each of you, each of the candidates, and Tim, you're welcome to do this as well. Could each of you spend a minute just telling us where you grew up and which 3 social issues, however big or small, you're most passionate about? Maybe we could start alphabetically by first name with Claire.
Thanks, Sarah. I grew up in East Burwood and have been in this area for about 14 years, including living in Carrum Downs, Frankston Heights, and now centrally in Frankston. 3 social issues I'm quite passionate about, and I'll probably come back to some of these a bit later on. The environment, young people, so I work at a school as well with Jay as a careers advisor, so particularly around work skills, employment, vocation, and also more vulnerable members of our community that I don't want to see left behind.
Thanks, Claire. Gab, you're up next.
Thanks, Sarah. Grew up in Coburg, moved to Blackburn for a few years with my husband when we had the first grandchild on both sides, so we had to split ourselves evenly between grandparents, and we've been in Frankston now for 8 years and really enjoying raising our kids here, so close to the beach and wonderful communities. The 3 social issues that are closest to my heart, homelessness and affordable housing in particular, I think is a real issue, particularly here on the peninsula. In the environment, obviously, because if we don't have a planet, then we're all a bit stuffed. And as Claire said, I think for me, vulnerable people, I think there are a lot of voices that don't get heard because they're not voices of great influence, and they're the voices that I would like to hear.
Excellent. All right, Jay, you're up next.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hello, guys. My name is Jay. I grew up in a number of different places, had a bit of a unique upbringing. My father is a pastor or a minister of religion, a reverend, much like Mr. Costello. And so we moved about every 3 to 4 years. So I did a bit of my growing up in Brisbane and in Melbourne and in Orbost. Probably did most of it in the Goldfields town of Castlemaine, but currently residing here in Langwarrin with my family, where we moved to Frankston 5-6 years ago. So we've been here for the last 5 to 6 years. I would have to say that the 3 biggest issues that concern me would be, number 1, equality, that we live in a society where everyone has an equal chance, has a fair go. Poverty, I believe in a fair spread of the resources and of the fruits of the labor of our country. And definitely the one that probably concerns me the most, and the young people the most, would be the environment and environmental degradation. So those would be the 3 issues that most concern me.
Thank you, candidates. Tim, you're not, or I should call you Reverend Costello. That's a bit more polite, isn't it?
Tim is fine.
Thank you.
He's a national living treasure. You can call him Tim.
You're not running for council, which you're probably relieved about. But what do you see as 3 social issues that you're most passionate about in this season of your life?
Well, I resonate with what others have just said. And I might just say, Sarah, you're doing a great job as moderator, much better than the one that moderated the Trump-Biden debate. And I'm sure this is going to be comprehensible. I watched that debate and couldn't actually understand any of it. Look, my issues, firstly, were social housing. So in St Kilda, we had so many homeless, and we were the first council I ran on this platform to put ratepayers' dollars into social housing. So St Kilda has about 13% of all housing stock that's social housing. Melbourne has about 4%. Why do we have homelessness? Well, there's the reason. Whilst there on council, pokies were introduced to Victoria. And I saw people who didn't drink, smoke, have an addiction, own businesses, owned their own home, lose everything when pokies were introduced. And that's been an issue that I've been passionately concerned about, well, since 1991, when they were introduced and I was on council. Look, the third issue is really the issue that all have touched on, namely, how do you integrate economic growth and livelihoods with sustainable care for the environment and for our natural resources. And that was a very, very alive in St Kilda when I was mayor.
Thank you. And we might ask you a couple more questions too. We've got 3 candidates here who are sort of stepping up for the first time to be involved or to offer themselves to be involved. How and why did you get involved in local politics? And do you feel that it's an effective way to make change?
Yes, so I'd grown up in Blackburn, so something in common with you there, Gab, and Blackburn was a very different world to St Kilda, where I moved with my wife and 2 children. We had a third born there in 1984. It was the old tart of Melbourne. It was the boarding houses and the runaway kids, the street workers, the mentally ill, the druggies actually congregated. And I literally watched, I was working as a lawyer and a minister, I literally watched new money discover St Kilda, which a lot of people rejoiced about, pushed up house prices, rentals, and 3rd, 4th generation of St Kilda poor being forced out. So literally they, in summers at least, had the beach, they had public transport, and they were being forced to the back of Broadmeadows and Dandenong. And so if, without sounding too spiritual, I was reading my Bible, Isaiah 65, and it said, they shall build houses and live in them. No longer shall they build houses and others live in them. And that was an enlightening rod for me. I thought, that's what's happening here. So I, with a group of independents, formed a group called Turn the Tide. We stopped high-rise development going up along St Kilda foreshore, which was all about to happen. Hard to believe, but in the late 80s, early 90s, they were going to turn St Kilda into the Gold Coast. There would have been overshadowing of the beach with the high-rise. We stopped that. And we then put that cultural argument, which said everyone who lives in St Kilda actually has a claim on our community, including those who we just call riffraff, want to move out, move on, get rid of. So social housing was the way we did that. We actually said, no, we're going to dedicate ratepayers' dollars to doing that. We were the first council in Australia to do it. It was always a state or federal government issue. Other councils, I remember South Sydney got me up as mayor saying, well, we've got the same problem. We need, how did you pull this off? They said, why would ratepayers agree to this? And really it was an equity cultural argument to say, if you really want to live in Carlton, or St Kilda to be like Carlton, where you've got to own a BMW and wear a Rolex watch to actually feel you belong, or is the colourful diversity of all different groups in St Kilda something we celebrate. We won that cultural argument and we won it politically, and that's how we ended up with so much social housing in St Kilda.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from that, and a lot that's probably relevant as we think about Frankston. So thank you. Now, we have got a question which I'm not going to pose to you now, candidates. We'll leave it for question time, but I just want to acknowledge David's question about erosion of the southeast green wedge. So we will come back to that as we go along. Now, the 3 candidates are working, obviously they're each standing for a different ward, but they're working as a team in terms of running for the election. And they're united by their commitment to the Australia Remade vision. Some of you watching may have never heard of that and wonder what on earth it is. So I wonder, Claire, if you could give us a brief introduction to it.
Certainly. I'm not even sure how I heard about the Australia Remade vision, but I know it was a couple of years ago, and I read through it, got very excited about it. And I think at the time, actually, Environment Victoria had a hub open in Frankston, and we sort of made some inroads, even planning a community event to explore the 9 pillars in more detail. And I think then it just, the timing wasn't right with, I think, a state election around the corner or something like that. But I got excited just about sharing the vision for the sake of it as a conversation starter. And I think it's a really good time to revisit it, actually, because part of their idea was to present to Australians a new compelling story that might ignite hope and give us directions forward. They spent over a year, I believe, interviewing everyday Australians and making sure they were hearing all of those voices, including people who lacked housing or lacked work, Indigenous Australians, single parents. And they sort of said, if you were to take time and dream about the kind of Australia you'd like to see, what would it look like? And as much as we are unique, diverse people and communities, they said on the whole, there was this resonance that we do actually know what we want if we are given the opportunity to take time to dream and to put aside probably some of our distrust or our cynicism. And I think we've got a lot of barriers and we've been encountering them. I think even in our campaigning, I get this sense that some of the comments I've read, what's the point of even having councillors? Why are they even there? Nothing ever changes. So there's a lack of trust and there is a cynicism about progress being made. We've tried, we've spoken, I've thrown in my 2 cents worth and I'm going to quit trying because nothing ever changes. So this was a dreaming and visioning process. One of the things on their website, it says, we are a voice for the new paradigm, one forged in the fires of the climate emergency, the iniquity of inequality, which again, we've already touched on a bit today, and the obvious failings of a business as usual approach. So this new paradigm, they refer to as being one in which everything is connected. Our economy serves people and nature, and democracy is something that we do. Again, that's something we're doing, isn't it? We're trying to do democracy. And I'm aware that we'll come back to this as well. We're not leaflet dropping. We're not putting pictures of our faces all over town. Some people say that's crazy and there's no way I'll get votes if people don't know what I look like. But we're trying to do democracy differently. All of these forms of getting something in your mailbox, of looking at a poster, they're passive. They don't require much of you, but we actually want to start conversations. And one of the most exciting bits of feedback from a dear friend of mine who lives in Sandhurst was, she said, tonight all the voting adults in the house, I think maybe there were 4 of them, we discussed local politics and how we might vote. And I thought, well, fantastic. That's one of the things that makes us feel like we've already won. Even if we don't end up on council, the fact that more people are taking more interest, we think that's wonderful. So these 9 pillars emerged as a portrait of the collective hopes and dreams of Australians. That was in 2017. And one of the reasons we were keen to get Tim Costello involved in today's conversation, if you go to the endorsements page on the Australia Remade website, you'll see Tim's name there, I think at number 3 or number 4. So obviously there's alignment there, but of course, Tim Costello is now also a Frankston local living in South Ward. So I might do a little bit of a campaign pitch at the end and see if I can secure your vote. So yeah, I do encourage people to head over to the Australia Remade website and have a look there. We are all inspired by it, and I do have a pragmatic, I'm a bit of an idealist, but I have a pragmatic bent as well. And I think if someone has done all that hard work and put together something inspiring and compelling, why on earth would we spend our time reinventing the wheel? So it just was easy to say, we love this. And, you know, their research suggests that a lot of Australians are going to resonate with it too. And so that's our framework and our vision. I just want to finish by saying that we are not a party. A lot of people have been pushing us as candidates, not just the 3 of us, but all candidates. What party's backing you? Where's your alignment? You must be Liberal or Labor. They want to box us. Are you a member? We're not. I'm not a member of a political party. I'm not aligned or affiliated with any political party. And I think Tim Costello suggested that's how he started out. To be independent is actually a thing. It is actually possible. And in one of our little Monday night planning strategy meetings, we chatted with a very inspiring guy called Dennis Ginnivan, who helped Cathy McGowan with her Indi campaign. Again, these things are, they're possible. And one of their ideas was getting people sitting around kitchen tables, having conversations, sending out people to get people inspired about democracy and conversation and participation. That, of course, has been really limited for us in a COVID year. So no door knocking, no town hall meetings. This is sort of the second best equivalent, I'm afraid. So the plus is it's recorded and hopefully can be shared with those that are interested.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And I guess it is handy for locals to be able not only just to go to your own website for you three candidates, but to be able to refer to a bigger framework that they can look at to sort of get a sense of where you're coming from and your values and what you're passionate about. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into what those pillars are about, and more particularly how they might affect particular areas of policy in Frankston, how they actually might look in a concrete sense. So we're going to go around again to each of the candidates and talk about talk about what the pillars are. Each candidate is going to talk about 2 to 3 each. And then if you could talk about how one of the pillars in particular could connect to specific policy issues for the city of Frankston. And Tim, you're welcome to jump in and make comment at any point as we go along, just in any way that you see relevant. So maybe we should go in the other direction now and start with Jay. What 3 pillars would you like to discuss, and how do you see those as applicable to the city of Frankston?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So the 3 pillars that sort of drew me in were 6, 8, and 9, and that is 6 is community, 8 is democracy, and 9 is justice. We'll start with numbers. We'll probably just go 6, 8, 9. So community is this idea that we have our basic needs met to such a degree that we can then join together in expressions of art and of family and of values. And it speaks, I know it seems a little strange, but it sort of speaks to ensuring that we have a strong infrastructure. So once you have a strong infrastructure in place, schools, roads, those sorts of things that meet the basic needs of people, you can then be freed up to sort of engage with each other. Number 8, of course, I think Claire's already spoken about democracy quite well. It's this, but I want to add a slightly different bent to it. I think a holistic democracy, or a strong, thriving democracy, is not just one where people decide who their leaders will be at both local, state, and federal levels, but I think a strong, thriving democracy is one where it's safe to be in the minority, where at every level of community and government, it represents the people it's purporting to lead. So if you've got, say, for instance, 51% of the population is female, it makes sense that 51% of councillors are female, 51% of representatives at state and federal level are female, 51% of the police and the teachers are female. It makes sense that the people who lead and who teach represent the communities they come from. Therefore, it should be safe to be in a minority. It should also be safe to express dissent in a safe and thriving democracy. And finally, justice. If you guys have watched our vision document, I sort of reworked Pillar 9, justice, into speaking about human rights, just because I wanted to contextualize it a little bit. Lots and lots of people are talking about human rights on the social medias and in the public forum. And justice is where people get what they deserve. And at the moment, that's looking like a conversation around how are we able to both put limits and restrictions on people's behaviours to ensure the health of a community, and where should that boundary be? We've just come through or lived through a lockdown, or we're still living through a lockdown. We've had a curfew. Is that actually okay? Does that infringe human rights? And if it does, is that okay in order to protect the health and safety of people? So those are sort of the 3 pillars that drew me in: 6, 8, and 9: community, democracy, and justice. I'd probably like to speak a little bit to community, because I think over the next 4 years, as we are coming out of the experience of the pandemic, Tim, I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about how you saw expressions of community around the world, because we've talked about it in regards to having good infrastructure, roads, schools, access to healthcare, and those sorts of things. But you would have worked in communities around the world that simply didn't have basic infrastructure, that didn't have their basic needs met. So what are some things that you saw done by people around the world to come together and to get through tough times together that you think we could replicate here in Frankston?
Yes. So I resonate with all you said there, Jay. I think you expressed that very well. Look, for the last 200 years in the West, community has been suffering at the expense of the state and the market. And we have been blessed that the market has created greater wealth, that the state largely has been both democratic and the state rights laws. The market can create wealth. The state can give us the laws that regulate, but actually where you live your lives, where you find meaning, where you actually, as we've discovered in COVID, have this sense, do I matter? And someone answers that, yes, you matter, is in community. And I think that is the fundamental question all humans have. Do I actually matter? The irony in my World Vision work is that often there are stronger communities and state and market hasn't worked so well. Therefore, a lot of our work there is actually two things. Hardware, which is the infrastructure you talked about. Is there clean water? Is there education and teachers get paid? Is there health systems when people get sick? That's the hardware. And software. Software is actually saying your relationship as communities should not get displaced by the hardware, by just the market and even the state. And so many states in the developing world are tyrannical, as we know. I think the issue for us is actually prioritizing community. My motto when I was on St Kilda Council, it's been my motto through life, is do whatever you can to create community, because it's there that people have, you know, some solidarity in the awful existential reality that none of us chose to be thrown up on this platform called life. Nobody actually gives us meaning and a point and a purpose. It's only in communities that share and play, that gather together and raise money and serve someone, you actually find that purpose. You actually deal with that existential anxiety. And boy, has COVID taught us this. I'll just finish by saying we discovered that the whole world is biologically connected by a virus. So that Boris Johnson, Tom Hanks, and now Donald Trump can get the virus just as easily as a homeless person exposed to the elements. We are interdependent. We are all vulnerable. And in that solidarity and community suddenly becomes everything. It suddenly becomes everything. So I personally feel that whether it's overseas, we've just finished a campaign, End COVID for All, which has been saying our borders might be shut, but our hearts aren't shut. Let's not forget our neighbours, Australia. Those neighbours have fragile health systems. And none of this ends for any of us, this COVID virus, until it ends for all of us. That is bringing community together. So supporting you guys, I love what you stand for, because I discern in you that sort of value, that sort of solidarity. That's what Frankston needs.
Thanks, Tim. And I think it's interesting because, you know, the three of you are running for local council. Some people might think, oh, you know, local council, you know, what powers do you really have? How far does your jurisdiction really, you know, extend? You're just worrying about, you know, the cost of parking in the CBD or people walking dogs. Those might, of course, be important issues for people too. But based on Tim's reflections, what happens at a local level is the most important. So that's a real point that we can reflect upon. And in doing so, we're going to move along to, I realise I've gone against the order on our list, our run sheet for today, so I'm throwing you guys all over the place here. And maybe Claire or Gab, whoever wants to jump in next with your pillars, you can do so.
Yeah, I'm happy to go. I just wanted to follow up with on that topic of community. I guess some people have suggested that our motherhood statements about our vision are too lofty and potentially unhelpful in terms of what does this look like on the ground at a local level. And that's where this whole idea of community, that's a perfect example of how councils can support and catalyse the strengthening of communities. You think about recreation facilities, sporting grounds, clubs, neighbourhood houses. You think about the resourcing of volunteers and also the celebration of the contributions of volunteers. So we've just received the local Frankston News that has the write-up of all the people that have won awards for their volunteering in the community. This is really on the ground stuff, grants for community groups. So again, one of the questions posed to us as candidates is what's council going to do about COVID recovery? Now there's all sorts of responses at various levels, federal and state, in terms of recovery plans, benefits for those that are struggling to make ends meet, what it looks like for small businesses. A lot of those are actually state and federal, but one of the best things the council can do is resource those community groups that are on the ground, responding to those facing homelessness or struggling to put food on the table. Again, there's a connection there with thriving communities and making sure that no one gets left behind. So it takes a little bit more work to flesh out what these big visions might look like on the ground, but particularly even just thinking about Neighbour Day. So every year there's I don't know if it's National or International Neighbour Day, but it's the council that says get out there on this particular Sunday and use that as an excuse to have the conversation that you've been meaning to have. I did that a couple of weeks ago with a lady across the road. We sort of looked straight into each other's kitchens, but it took me such a long time to actually wander across the road with my mask and introduce myself. Council is well placed to say, meet people. Yes, we'll support you in having a street party. And yes, you might want to put some barricades in. It's your local council that will do that. Anyway, on to some of the pillars that I guess I engage with most closely and that inspire and excite me. Obviously caring for our natural world, which is pillar number 2. I've been quite interested and engaged in climate change and looking after the planet, and often people said, so tell me more about your interest, aren't you? And don't you have an accounting background? To sort of say that makes no sense. You're not an environmental scientist or an ecologist, so why are you interested in climate change again as an accountant? I feel like saying, well, because I live on the planet and I'm quite invested in this place, and now having 2 young primary age children, I'm even more invested in this place, and everyone actually that I know and love, and even those that I don't really know, everyone lives on this planet. So yes, I understand economics and studied economics at school and university. I think some of the tensions there where we're forced to choose between growth and the economy or the environment, often that's about timescale. That if we have the right timescale, it makes no sense not to care for the environment. There's that sense that actually our economy is 100% wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. If the sun were to stop shining, everything would stop growing and everything would die. Like, we are actually part of the environment. We don't exist separate to it. And I like the Native American proverb, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we actually borrow it from our children. And as much as some people suggest older people have lived their lives and don't care too much about the future, I actually get a different sense, having been involved in local environmental groups. Often it's the older people that I think care the most, because they're thinking about their legacy, they're thinking about their grandchildren, and they are genuinely concerned about the future. And this is where we've seen Frankston Council bravely, and I commend them for it, declaring a climate emergency last year. That will take time to work itself out in terms of what that looks like. They are encouraging households to explore solar panels and giving information and advice on home energy efficiency. They already have a scheme in place to facilitate composting. So whether or not you've got a home composting system or you can get a caddy and a bag and put it in your green waste now, even the emissions related to rubbish and waste. So there are practical on the ground things, replacing street lights with more efficient LEDs, which over their lifetime will save a lot of energy. So everyone, I think, would say, yes, we need to care for the environment. We want a habitable planet and we want a place where we can thrive. We want to protect our flora, fauna. Just this morning, someone posted a little video of a koala they saw in the Langwarrin Flora and Fauna Park, which was so exciting. So again, we need little good news stories like that, but we need to know what we're fighting for and why. And yeah, I don't think we need to be forced into these very binary decisions that we vote for the environment or we vote for business. We need to find ways to do both well. And here in Frankston too, so I guess this is coming into one of the other pillars about an economy that's for the people, focusing on services, which we can do really well, like the health and education precincts we have here with multiple hospitals. We have Chisholm TAFE, we have Monash University, all in the heart of our city. That some of our biggest employing areas, the major ones are actually health and education. So they're ways that you can generate economic activity without creating more stuff. It doesn't revolve around this throughput of extracting materials from the earth and encouraging people to buy things that they don't really need. You can have a thriving economy, particularly that focuses on services, without a corresponding growth in emissions or environmental destruction. The arts, hospitality, tourism, so there's some of the things that I guess excite me in terms of where can we find ways to grow without necessarily having a corresponding increase in waste or environmental damage. So in terms of work that people find, one of the pillars, number, I'm going to get the number of it wrong, I think it's 4, where all jobs have dignity. Again, we've talked about volunteering. So these are people that do work and they work hard in our community and they give a lot, but they're often undervalued because they're not paid. So again, with my careers advisor hat on, I like the shift. It's not that a career is what you do for paid work. A career now is considered to be much more broad. Do you have a role as someone's partner or someone's carer or someone's aunt or uncle or child? These are important aspects of who we are and how we express ourselves in the world. And Tim Costello has also talked about meaning and purpose, and work is at the heart of that. And it's not just paid work though, it's the different hats we wear, people that care for vulnerable members of the community, and that might be in the home without a formal label and no recognition, and that might be a role that lasts for decades or more. Or it might be people that are working in cared roles, paid or unpaid, out there in the community. I know that we've got advocates out there, for example, for people with disabilities. We need them to be able to access parks and beaches and enjoy what other people enjoy. In terms of jobs and work and COVID, it breaks my heart, for example, that most of the Year 10 students or Year 9, depending on their score, have missed out on the opportunity to do work experience this year because of COVID. So my own sort of survey responses from students say that's the highlight of what we do in our careers program, is go out there and engage in a very real way in the world of work. But also research says that's one of the best and most effective career development activities you can do with young people. They haven't been able to get out there, and I get excited about strengthening partnerships between industries and schools. And actually that's now the brief of all local learning and employment networks, that they need to facilitate those connections between young people, starting out discovering who they are, what skills and interests they have, but also what's our world like and what opportunities are there. What are the ones I know about that we all know about? But what are the new ones? You know, how do you prepare young people for jobs that don't exist yet? So we're focusing on transferable skills, soft skills, enterprise skills, so that people, can very readily prepare themselves for a series of jobs across a range of different industries. So I get really excited about that. And again, council has a role to play. Their work within schools, their work with the LEN, the chambers of commerce in industry, investing in businesses, but encouraging them particularly, that's one of the things close to my heart, to support young people who are really vulnerable, starting out their career and having just this really unsettled year that it's, I guess a lot of them feel like the rug's been pulled from under their feet. So there's links in there with mental health as well. I think I probably said heaps about that, but a shift from competition to collaboration. How can we catalyse, create opportunities to do more together rather than working in opposition to each other? So that's one of my passions. And I guess we're trying to demonstrate that in running together. There's efficiency in that. There's effectiveness in that because we bring different gifts and abilities. It's also been a whole lot more fun than campaigning on my own. So I guess that's a plug for community and collaboration there too.
Excellent. Thanks, Claire. And it's really clear to see how you've brought your background and your particular experiences to the way you engage with those pillars and inject that passion into questions for Frankston. So thank you. Tim, do you want to say anything to Claire's comments? You're on mute.
Of 2020, you're on mute.
Just to say, I heartily agree with those comments. And look, if I'm honest, why I really like backing independence is for this reason. If you read Fairfax Media or say versus Murdoch on Sky, ABC versus commercial, you see polarization happening, and they'll speak of leftists and rightists, and this polarization is so ridiculous. I think independents, like the three in front of you, get this, that those on the left have prioritized usually equality, and they see equality as important for all Frankston members. Those on the right have prioritized freedom, and they say freedom, therefore don't charge me too much in tax and let my business flourish. The truth is, we need both. We need freedom and equality. And I think that threading the needle, which I'm hearing in these three independents, we actually haven't met before, I don't think, is why that is just so important for a council like Frankston. So well done.
Thanks, Tim. Well, that's a bit of a risk jumping into a live meeting with three candidates you haven't met before, but I hope that it's paying off well for you so far. and I think we've been having a lively discussion, and it's only going to get more lively because now we're going to roll to Gab, who's going to talk about a couple more pillars and their application to the City of Frankston.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd like to begin with two acknowledgements. The first is to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on, wherever you are. We acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging. Here in Frankston, we meet on the land of the Bunurong people. And if you aren't sure who the traditional owners are of the land that you live on, you can just go into Google and type in Indigenous Nations Australia, and you'll get a map that shows every piece of Australia and who the traditional owners are. And it's just fascinating. There are so many of them, and there are some wonderful things that bring them together and some wonderful things that distinguish them from each other. But I would really encourage you to find out who the traditional owners are of the land on which you live. I would also like to acknowledge Millie Rooney, who is the director of Australia Remade, who's watching from the background, and just to thank Millie for the time that she's taken to meet with us, to talk with us about the work that Australia Remade is doing, to help Jay and I run some focus groups online because we haven't been able to do those in person. Millie, we're really grateful for your work. We're grateful for the person that you are and for the incredible just positivity and creativity and imagination of Australia Remade. You know, as Claire said, they really work on this idea of what would the world look like if you woke up tomorrow and the things that you were most afraid of were gone, were resolved. And that's really the question we want to ask the people of Frankston. What would Frankston look like if the thing that if the greatest obstacles and the greatest fears were removed, what would Frankston look like? And so that's really important for us. So we're really honoured to have you listening in, Millie. So for me, the pillars that most attracted me, firstly was the first pillar, which is a first people's heart, and that is recognising that the land that we live on does have previous owners, and that is a complicated part of our history and a really difficult part of our history, but also provides us with so many opportunities to learn and to engage with our Indigenous people. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia are amazing and have a connection to this country that is, it's the oldest continuing culture in human history. Like, what an amazing thing that is to live in that country. Here in Frankston, we have some local community groups that work to increase people's knowledge of and awareness of our Indigenous peoples. And my daughter's kindergarten, they had an Indigenous woman who came for half the year, for 6 months, came to every kindergarten session, and they learnt traditional songs and they learnt about the land, and they went out on bush kinder. And my daughter it just felt so completely normal to her to learn about the Indigenous people. And I love that. I love that idea of it being such an integral part of our education from the very beginning, that we understand our people, our First Nations people, and that we have a heart to conserve and to raise up that culture. The Nema Jambana is a local group. It means gathering by the bay, and they provide a whole bunch of services for the Indigenous people here in Frankston, and that's something that I know that the local council have done things to support, but there's certainly plenty of other ways that the council could be supporting that group. I know that the McClellan Sculpture Gallery have some really interesting ideas about building an Indigenous garden and having some bush kinder programs there. So I would really want to see our local council in discussions with McClellan to figure out how to do that, how to promote that within Frankston, to local school groups and community groups to engage with our Indigenous cultures. Karen Kent is running in the North East Ward, and she is an Indigenous woman. So I would really encourage anybody to read up about Karen and where she stands and to support her. I know that Jay, who's running in the same ward as Karen, is a big supporter of hers. So do the work to find out about your candidates and support any Indigenous candidates, whether you're in Frankston or elsewhere. We need those voices in our places of leadership. The other pillar that's particularly important to me, my husband and I are raising 3 daughters, so one area that's really important to us is a new dawn for women, and part of the reason that Claire and I are running is because we really believe in the importance of women in leadership. Jay touched on that before. When women make up 51% of the population, but only 34% of councillors on local councils in Victoria, it's unacceptable. We need to do something about that. And so, Claire and I have put ourselves forward as candidates to address that. Jay is, a father of 5 daughters. So he's also invested in this. But, it's real to us that Jay doesn't just say, I support women in council, but he says, I support women in council enough to say, hey guys, I think you should vote for this woman. So we really mean it when we say that we're for women in leadership. This year, 39% of all candidates in local government are women. It's not 50-50, which it should be, but it's 39%. Here in Frankston, it's 22%. So I really want to see our council doing practical things to support and encourage women to be running for local council. We can't expect women's voices, the needs of women to be properly represented if we don't have women in the places where representation is happening. And so I would want to see Frankston Local Council at the next election doing real work to encourage women to run, to support women to run. I don't know what the technicalities of that would look like, but offering women financial support to pay the nomination fee. It's $250 to nominate. For some of us, that isn't a lot of money. For others, it is. And you imagine a single mum who's unemployed thanks to COVID. how is she going to run? That's insane, you know. So I would want to see the council doing really practical things towards the next election to support more women. The more women on the ballot paper, the more chance we have of women in the council chamber. And so for us, that's really a driving force of what we're doing. And my daughters are very excited and keep saying to me, so what are you going to do when you're on council? What kind of powers will you have? Unfortunately, they're disappointed that there won't be any actual superpowers, but I'm hoping that, you know, like maybe if I get elected mayor, the robe and the chain might be enough to impress them. I don't know. But I love that even if I were not to be elected, that my daughters get to see me run. They get to see me run beside other amazing women like Claire, and hear the voices of women advocating for the things that are important to us. The third pillar that really appeals to me is diversity. Claire was saying on our call earlier this week, well, we've certainly seen a diversity of opinions in the Facebook pages, and that really excites us. You know, we're not intimidated by hearing voices that differ to ours. One of the really important sort of founding ideas of Australia Remade was that they would represent every voice, no matter how much they might personally agree or disagree with it, but that people need to be heard. That's the point of democracy, is that all voices are heard. And that doesn't mean we can always do everything that everybody wants, but we can certainly we can do the work and we can make the effort to hear those voices. And I think that that's something that really drives us, is to engage with people who have questions, regardless of how big or small, regardless of whether their issue is the cost of parking in the CBD or the green wedge or homelessness. We want to hear those voices and engage in those conversations. We want to talk to people who are so different to ourselves, because that's the only way that we can really represent people. And so we celebrate diversity in all of its complicated, awkward wonderfulness. That's something that for us is really important, and we really want to celebrate that and acknowledge that in our campaign. I think that when we look at a council that currently has 6 men and 3 women, and none of those women are standing for re-election, that is a problem for diversity. And I think that, again, as I said, I think that the council needs to be very proactive about promoting greater diversity in the people running for council, because we only get diversity on council if we get diversity on our ballot paper. So for us, that's also something really important, and that's something we've worked really hard to talk to, promote, have conversations with other people who are running for council. The lovely Sue Baker has reached out to all the female candidates just to say, hi, I support you, what can I do to help? And I just think that's amazing, you know, to have candidates who stand together and say, your success doesn't threaten my success. Your success is about us building up people who are going to make a difference. And that for us has been a really important part of the reason why we're running, and our goals as candidates. Is being elected is all good and well, but along the way, if we can make the world a better place, and if we can get good people on council, then we consider that very much to be a win for Frankston and for us.
Thanks, Gab. I think it's a pretty unique election message that you're sharing there, and not one that's often heard in these sorts of contexts. So I think it's really refreshing. And I think it's interesting hearing you, because there's a tension here. You know, people often want to hear about your approaches to specific policies when you're running for council, and these are important, but in another sense, you know, there are issues that are going to come up when you're on council that no one can predict. And what we're getting to explore here is the character and the values that you take into every decision you make.
Yep.
And I think that's really important. Now, we are coming up to the time when the candidates can respond to some questions. Before we do that, I just want to firstly give the opportunity to Tim to make any further comment, and then I will hand over to Claire to give some thank yous out, and then we will address the questions that we've got. So Tim, if you want to say anything, go for it.
Yeah, no, that was fantastic, Gab, what you were saying. I was just reflecting back in 1991 when I got elected to St Kilda Council. Back then it was already 6 women and 6 men. And that continued with greater numbers. And what you just said rather shocked me. And what's the importance of that? I think the importance, as I recognised it back in my time, was that councillors are required to do two things. They're to cast a vision and then within a budget to make choices. And if you choose one thing, you can't do other things. And speaking personally, it's not true of all men, but my wife actually makes all the real choices. She's the one who actually says, if we buy this, we can't do that. And I think I saw that with the women on council in St Kilda. They were much more grounded with the choices that councils make and the judgments you bring to bear on those choices. And that's why I really affirm the message you're just giving.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you. And Claire?
So I'm aware that some people might think this has been great. I've heard enough. It's about an hour. So we're going to head into Q&A, and I encourage everyone to stick around for that. That's often where things get really interesting, and we can respond specifically to some of the pressing questions or thoughts or ideas that people listening have. But before people disappear, I definitely want to make sure, Sarah, that we thank you publicly. We so appreciate not just your time today, but the effort that you've put in behind the scenes, just coming up with a framework for how this conversation will run. We would have loved to do this live, sort of real time in a town hall or at the mechanics hall in Frankston or somewhere within the community, but not possible. And thank you also, Tim, for making yourself available. We've so appreciated that. And one of the questions that I would have, and so Sarah could cue this up depending on how many other questions there are, I was involved in a community consultation. It was one of the council's visioning sessions about 2040, I think. So one of the responsibilities of councillors every sort of new term is to come up with a 4-year plan, but they're also working on a longer term strategy, and they're wanting community consultation. And there's even more, I was going to say pressure, no, I think it's mandated that councillors do that hard work of consulting and don't just decide for the people, but they listen to the people. And someone sort of suggested that Frankston might be where St Kilda was a few decades ago, sort of this untapped potential. So I'd like to hear your thoughts as someone who's been very involved in St Kilda, but also has chosen to move to Frankston. So we can cue that one up if there is time. We've taken a bit of a risk. Oh, and I want to thank too, you won't see these people, but Julia is behind the scenes helping with some event stuff and helping with comments and questions, particularly on the Facebook page. We also have Achilles helping us with the IT. We are incredibly grateful. Some people will then say, who's backing you? You know, if you're unprofessional, people think you're not taking it too seriously. And the moment you look a little bit professional, people wonder who's bankrolling it. So hopefully we do look professional, but no one's bankrolling this. We are running a reasonably low budget campaign. I just felt in a COVID year, I couldn't even ask my friends for money. I just didn't want to be out there sort of shaking the hat or the tin and saying pitch in for the campaign. But I'm a person of principle, and sometimes stubbornly so. So the idea of letterbox dropping and the leaflets, and I've seen them blowing around our neighbourhood. It has been windy. I'm not saying they weren't put in letterboxes, but they are blowing around the neighbourhood, and we've got 30-something candidates, and you multiply that across the 76 different councils all having elections, and the waste and the plastic for the signage. We've taken a risk of not doing that. My passion for democracy also says it shouldn't be about whether or not you can canvass your entire ward with photos of your face. People shouldn't be voting on just familiarity or I recognise that face. They should be voting with an alignment of vision and values and getting to know people. And I think my conversations and interactions with people are demonstrating clearly there's a lack of trust. This cynicism about the function of council and how nothing can change and nothing works, and a negativity that is out there. How do you build trust when you can't even meet people? And not that it's all about shaking hands and kissing babies, because politicians can be excellent at that, and it doesn't mean they're worthy of your trust, but building rapport and people getting to know you, that's been really hard. It's been a difficult season in which to campaign. And when I agreed with some friends that I would run, it was the end of June and we were coming out of lockdown, and I actually had no idea we were about to head into an even more severe one. And had I known, I probably would have said, no, it's not the year for me. I do think that the next elections in 4 years' time will be very interesting because we're moving to a single member ward structure. So hopefully there will be better local representation. Candidates will have a smaller area to work with and hopefully a closer connection to the local issues on the ground. Not sure what that's going to mean for preference deals and dummy candidates and some of those things that continue to go on behind the scenes, but I know of a couple of stunning female candidates that would have run but for COVID and other life pressures, and they didn't run this time. So anyone listening that is interested and inspired, you might begin a 4-year plan and say, maybe that will be me in 2024. But I guess one of my key points is a bit of an ask for those that have appreciated this, that sense alignment with who we are and what we stand for, and I guess the big picture vision and some of the ways in which that will work itself out on the ground. Because we're not doing leaflets and because we're not doing postering, we really are relying on events like this, social media, and a lot of word of mouth connections. So our doors are open. We've been holding things like virtual door knocks. So there's a Zoom session where people can sort of drop in. I'm happy to run more of those. I have done some with more success than others. But we are very happy to have people contact us. We're just not allowed to knock on doors. So we're happy to make our contact details available. And we're particularly mindful that those who aren't particularly high skilled with technology, that don't have internet access, that aren't well connected, are sort of missing all of this, and they might just have a 300-word candidate statement. Most people don't know they can log on to the VEC website already and see the candidate statements and see questionnaires. We were asked to sort of articulate our vision for Frankston and the skills we bring. That's all there. You can actually go online, look up your candidates, do your homework, irrespective of whether or not you've seen posters or received leaflets. But most people don't even know that. So that's one of the plugs, I guess, we want to put out there is you can do all that research. Most people don't. Again, speaking to a neighbour who said, oh yeah, those flyers, I get them and they go straight in the bin, which is one of those things. It's like, oh, and that's why I didn't want to spend money and whether or not they were going to be recycled or not. Yeah, just to see the paper wastage. So we need people's help. If you're online with our vision, reach out particularly to those that you think will be aligned with what we're doing. So, and if those people can spread the word to others, that's sort of exponential growth that we know is a thing. It's like how viruses spread. If some of our ideas and I guess our campaign platform could go a bit viral, that would really help us get the word out. So that's democracy in action, where people actually are required to step up and do something. And we're asking that of supporters and friends. So I think we're ready to head into the Q&A session. So thanks.
All right, cool. So we're going to begin the Q&A session by deploying our second poll. And our second poll is going to ask attendees what you think is the most important characteristic of a council candidate. So I think our IT guru Achilles is going to do that now. And you can do that. While you do that, I think we'll work through chronologically and go back to David's question, because that was the first to pop up today. He's concerned about the erosion of the southeast green wedge, and he's asking, as candidates, what do you understand about the green wedges? Now, before we jump into this, we've got about 6 questions lined up so far. So we'll spend, that just gives you an idea of how many questions we've got and how much time we might spend on each. So whoever wants to jump in on the green wedge question, feel free.
I know there's a real tension regarding the green wedge, because I understand that we put that space aside. When we want to build up an area, we also need to put aside space that we won't build up. But I know that there's real pressure to use that space, particularly to expand businesses. There's a lot of really great businesses that have set up in Carrum Downs, in particular in the industrial areas there, and they're running out of room. And so there's this sense of wanting to expand. For me personally, I think this is one of those areas of real creativity and imagination. I think this is one of those opportunities where I don't want to use that green wedge space. I think it's vitally important that we have spaces that we set aside that are not used for buildings or for businesses, or that are creating space within our environment. But I think that obviously the need for jobs in Frankston is great. The need for businesses to grow is great, and wanting to keep businesses here is also a real, that's a real tension there. And so I think this is a real area for creativity and imagination. I'd like to see businesses creating more sustainable ways of working. What is the council doing to encourage or to research sustainable sort of ways of doing business? Are there things that those companies could be doing where they actually require less land mass to do the thing that they want to do? I think that this is not an either or situation, but how do we do both? How do we attract businesses and create job opportunities for local residents, but at the same time not dismiss the incredible need for not just taking over our natural environment for the sake of more business, more jobs, more money. And so, imagine being the council that is known for sustainable practices in business. Imagine being known for attracting companies that use innovative forms of manufacture to use less land, to create less emissions. I think that's actually a really exciting opportunity for us here.
Yeah, I think you've articulated the tension between those two poles really, really well, Gabe. And I'd really want to emphasise, as the candidate who would represent Carrum Downs, that this isn't sort of let's just cut down the green spaces and put up more factories. This is really, okay, well, what can we do that's new and innovative, that's going to keep businesses, attract new businesses, and get people jobs during this time? Because if we just plow ahead and continue to get rid of our green wedges, which is what has happened over the last couple of generations in this area, we are going to destroy one of the very things that makes this area so attractive. People move here because it's beautiful, and it's beautiful because it's green. And so if we just get rid of the green, what do they call it? I think the phrase I came across is the greying of Frankston. We've been getting rid of the green and we've been putting in the grey, and it's no longer going to be the unique and special and beautiful place. So this is an area that calls for human ingenuity, calls for new technologies, it calls for new ways of doing things, because we need to preserve the green spaces. We need to preserve the environment. It's what keeps us alive.
Thanks, Jay and Gab. Now we might check back, go back to the poll that we just ran and to see what the results are. So I think they're coming up on my screen. So 59% of attendees who have responded see character as the most important characteristic in local councillors. 18% see conviction, and 18 as well see competence as the most important characteristic. 6% see capacity, and 0% confidence in comparison to the rest. So character, that fits in well with the vision of Australia Remade in terms of what we've been exploring today. And maybe that's why you're the attendees who have come today, because that's what you're interested in. But it's really interesting to get that sense. And if you're watching this on Facebook, feel free to share your response to that poll as well. Now, our next question, we have two questions from Gillian. The first one is, have the three of you had any experience in organising, community organisations, politics, campaigns, etc.? And her second question, which we may have covered, Claire, particularly when you discussed the pillars, was that last year the Frankston City Council declared a climate emergency. What would be your priorities to support this if you're elected to council? So the first question's about your experience. I'm not sure, Claire, maybe you want to do a brief overview of who's done what?
And there was an interesting segue with the responses where no one said confidence is what they're looking. I'm sure they don't want councillors that lack confidence and sit there and feel like they can't contribute and don't have much grit. But I've been reflecting on this a lot in the last couple of weeks, because that's probably not my strongest suit. But I feel that those with confidence actually have the greatest chance of being elected, because they want to get out there, they want to speak and be heard, they want their face out there. That's the aspect of campaigning that's just really not me, to be honest. And I feel like it's a weakness because it'll help you get to the table. But then if you have a room full of 9 people that all exude a whole lot of confidence, maybe even highly assertive people, do you end up with a council that struggles to collaborate and work effectively? So yeah, that's something I will continue to ponder. I have days where I think maybe I make a better advocate or activist, because there is a need to have a reasonable degree of confidence in campaigning and putting yourself out there. So the question is about how much experience do we have? I've organised some community events, probably more in the activist community organising kind of space. They've generally been quite small. There was a climate rally I organised at the foreshore, and I think that might be, if the question's from the same Gillian, that might even be how she and I first connected. That was, I think, after Tony Abbott came to power, and I was quite upset at the pace at which he wound back some of the measures to protect our climate. And that was where I said, someone's got to stand up and do something. And that's the kind of leader that I am. I step in if there's a gap, if no one else is willing to, but don't really feel that it needs to be me. We did touch on the climate emergency. A lot of climate change policies really are at that higher level in terms of pricing and federal policy. And I think the reality is we've seen some prime ministers rise and fall around that topic and the strength of our fossil fuel industry and their lobby groups. So it's a very hot political topic still in Australia. Some countries have moved past that to bipartisan or tripartisan sort of solutions and agreement in that. I think one of the best things that council can do is the everyday implications. And I also saw that there's a question that my new friend Alex has asked. So Alex is someone that I had a great conversation with, who I would not have met were it not for running in this campaign. And he had a question about composting. So for those that don't know, the council already has this caddy system. But I think take-up is low and awareness is low. If you don't read the local council news, or if you don't get the email that I think comes out each month, you wouldn't know about it. But there are emissions implications of what we do with our waste in terms of methane, and that being a greenhouse gas. And I also think about the trucks that come and stop and take all this waste away when we can deal with it on site. So that's just a little example of going, well, actually there's a number of different implications there. I know the council already does good work with schools, so partnering and connecting and catalysing work at schools, environment groups, supporting and resourcing that. Frankston High School has some really strong students who lead in this space and lead their own group. And I went to their screening of the 2040 movie doco recently. So I think one of the best things that council can do is advocate and make sure it's on the radar, because we can put that pressure. The pressure trickles up actually from grassroots, local government towards state government, and then in time, federal government as well. Or those of us that know about the science don't feel we've got that kind of time. Yeah, particularly advocacy and awareness. There's a lot that councils need to do, obviously around planning and what's going to happen if we see more storm surges and erosion, sea level rise, disaster and emergency management planning, which is in the remit of local government. What happens when people's homes are threatened by bushfire? So there's mitigation, but then there's also preparation. Like what will it look like if we have more heat waves? How do we make sure that vulnerable people are being looked after? And part of declaring a climate emergency is saying, this is serious. We need to work to slow it. We can't stop it. We, throw a whole lot of resources. That's what you do when you have an emergency. It's a bit of a drop everything. So it's about prioritising it as a key issue that needs our attention, that can't be put off until it's more convenient, because it will be too late then. But to being serious about looking at that as an issue when we engage in planning to care for people, where infrastructure gets built, how do we particularly protect the most vulnerable? And how do we lead with integrity? So one of the other things the council's done is sort of purchasing agreements in terms of supporting renewable energy. How do we make sure that the energy we're using is generated using renewables? How do we champion that, invest in that, and encourage local residents to do the same?
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire. Now, we've come to 3:15, which is the time that we plan to finish, and we do want to keep to our time. The questions here won't just be disregarded. I am fairly confident, and the candidates can confirm, that they will respond to those questions appropriately, whether that's via Facebook if you're connected with the Facebook page, or if they have your contact details already, which they may have your email address if you have signed up to come along to this Zoom conference.
Sarah, I will add to that each of us can be reached, so you can find our website at reimaginingfrankston.com, and each of us have an email address. So mine is gabriel@reimaginingfrankston.com, and we've got Claire and Jay at. So feel free to get in touch with us if there's specific questions you want to ask to the team or to us as individuals.
Fantastic.
And, sorry, Sarah. If you're in the Northeast Ward, on Reimagining Frankston on the Facebook page, I'll chuck up. I've got virtual door knocking sessions from 5 to 5:30 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'm also going to do a 1-hour listening space from 7:30 to 8:30 next Friday. So if you want to come along, have a quick chat, I've got a 30-minute session. If you want to have a more in-depth discussion, I've got a 1-hour session on the Friday, and all the details to get into that will be on our Reimagining Frankston Facebook site.
Excellent. Thank you. Very helpful details. So before we finish, I feel like we need to just throw back to you, Tim, and ask you, if you were responding to our poll about what's the most important thing to see in a counsellor, what would you have chosen? Do you need me to run through the options? Or
No, I chose character, and this may be a self-selecting group, but look, with Casey Council and what's happened there, Stonington Council, the question of developers always being overwhelming with their interests, the community interest. The only bulwark against it is character. I happen to be watching American politics, so you can understand why I think character is pretty fundamentally important in terms of keeping others safe and treating others with respect and not being able to be suborned. And let me just finish by saying, people say council's really just local. It is local, but often they mean just rates, roads and rubbish. I think casting a vision, reimagining Frankston, is exactly what is needed. So congratulations on all of you. I know your feelings. When you put yourself out there for acceptance or rejection, it's pretty scary. It's a vulnerable place to be. So I just want to congratulate you all three for doing this.
Great. And thank you so much, Reverend Tim Costello, for joining us this afternoon. It's really elevated the event to a special level to have you here and to have your input. So thank you. Thank you to our candidates, Gabrielle Norris, Claire Harvey and Jay Johnston. Thanks for having me, because I'm in Casey and I don't get to vote in these council elections. This is my way of being involved. And thanks to Achilles and Julia behind the scenes and helping things to run.
Yes.
So good.
Thanks again to you too, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Pleasure.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. It was great to not see you.